I want to make money betting on the NFL in 2020. But are the Cowboys still the best team in the NFC East? How do I bet on the football team, Giants, Eagles, and Cowboys? I need information I can use from week 1 through the playoffs. Welcome back to aosportspicks TV. I'm Alpha Omega. Now that we have a few weeks of the 2020 NFL season in the books, there is enough statistical data from 2020 to put out videos giving fairly accurate projections for each team throughout the rest of the season as well as the playoffs. This video covers every team in the NFC East. And for those of you who are new to the channel or new to sports betting in general, the NFC East is the Washington Football Team, the New York Giants, the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Dallas Cowboys. This video is one part of a playlist providing season updates on every team in the NFL. I designed the entire playlist to be useful from now through the end of the season. So it doesn't matter when you find these videos, you can still use them to make money. Once you finish this video, you can find the playlist by clicking the link in the pinned comment or in the description. I recommend you watch the whole playlist more than once because I'm putting a lot of information into each one of these videos. I also have timestamps in the progress bar and in the description so you can easily choose what you want to watch. After watching, you'll have more knowledge than your friends, you'll be able to create smarter DFS lineups, and most importantly to me, you can start making winning sports bets from now all the way through the championship. The future of sports betting continues to grow as not only professional sports are getting into the action, but now college sports as well. From Sam McQuillan at Bloomberg Law, the 5-year, $1.625 million agreement between the University of Colorado and sports betting operator PointsBet is the latest in an explosion of ad deals between sportsbooks and teams or leagues, although it's the first collegiate pact of its kind. So let me explain how I bet on the NFL. Firstly, the NFL is an incredibly tough market that is notoriously difficult to succeed in year over year. This is how I've managed to win over the last few years. What I do is I take all of the information gathered from before the season started, meaning all of the trades, free agency, injuries, coaching changes, the draft, roster construction, all of the statistical data from 2019, and a lot more than that to start making my 2020 week-by-week predictions. Then I take the 2020 play-by-play statistical data from the weeks that have already been played to help determine where my projections are correct and where my projections are wrong for the upcoming week. Then I look for the best number from a list of every major sports book on whichever games I feel give me the best opportunity to make money. Finally, I do my best to get as much money down on those games as possible. My goal is to give you enough information to do the same thing. Having said that, let's get started. I want to say right off the bat that I don't think Washington is the worst team in the division. It's obviously the New York Giants. I like what Washington is doing. The fact that they got a true number 1 wide receiver in the 3rd round with Terry McLaurin is great. Washington didn't use high draft capital, but got a high return. That's a home run. In the 2019 draft, Washington gets a high-impact player in rookie Chase Young. Young is dealing with a nagging groin injury, but has already shown the explosiveness that made him the number 2 pick in the draft. I'm also excited about running back Antonio Gibson, another 3rd-round pick with big potential. From Peter Haley at NBC Washington, Terry McLaurin went from a sneaky favorite of draft pundits to an attention grabber in camp to Washington's go-to option in a matter of a few months. And now it feels like Antonio Gibson could soon follow that precise path. Both players went in round 3. Both players entered the league with pro-ready skill sets, yet were originally slated to assume complementary roles, not featured ones. While the current thought is that Dwayne Haskins may not be the future at quarterback in Washington, I'm not checked out on him yet, even though he was benched for Kyle Allen and is reportedly asking for a trade. It's too early to know what Washington has with him, and if I was them, I'd hold on to him. Former head coach Jay Gruden handled Haskins so poorly that it was full-on sabotage. Gruden would come out saying, "He's not ready," but then Washington only kept 2 quarterbacks on the roster. Then starter Case Keenum gets hurt and gets benched, and Haskins is forced into horrible situations with little preparation against tough defenses and understandably looked awful. Haskins wasn't prepped to play last year. He was a really good player in college and deserves the benefit of the doubt. Reed Goldsmith of Clutch Points, quoting Haskins' personal trainer, "Dwayne went through so much more than someone should have to have put on their shoulders as a rookie quarterback. You go in there and the head coach makes it known that he doesn't like you and makes it as hard as possible for you to be the guy. He was kind of on his own. It was him and the OC, Kevin O'Connell, were trying to figure it out, all while the head coach says a lot of nasty stuff about you, not only in the media, but also to the team." I'm not saying that Haskins will end up being the guy, but to place the blame at the feet of anyone other than Jay Gruden is disingenuous and wrong. I do not like Jay Gruden at all. The guy is a snake. He's trying right now to con his way into the head coaching spot in Jacksonville from Doug Marrone. If you want to know more about that story, I'll put a link at the top of the screen to my Jaguars season update where I go over it in more detail. Even sans Gruden, this is a team with a bunch of holes. Expectations are low, and every team on their schedule will be looking at Washington as a get-right spot. The good news is that the entire NFC East division is trash, so you can't say that Washington can't win the division, but it's a long shot. According to Bill Barnwell of ESPN, after 4 games, the NFC East is a combined 3-12-1. Since the AFL and NFL merged in 1970, there have been 344 divisional races. Philadelphia's tie saved the 2020 edition of the NFC East from being the worst division in modern league history through 4 games. Instead, this edition of the NFC East is merely the second worst division of the past 50 years. I like the hiring of Ron Rivera, if only because Rivera will bring some stability to the organization that hasn't been enjoyed during the Jay Gruden era. I think pairing head coach Ron Rivera with offensive coordinator Scott Turner and defensive coordinator Jack Del Rio could be a good pairing for the future of the team. With that much experience and with such low expectations, it's undoubtedly a liberating feeling to have the freedom to quietly build a competitive roster. There is a template for this team to turn it around, and that feels very familiar. Washington has a stable of first-round picks across the defensive line, who are already awesome. And now with the addition of Chase Young, who might be the best of the bunch, that gives Washington depth and takes away an opponent's ability to double team. Taking away the double team will help Washington on every passing down throughout the season, regardless of the opponent. The problem is that overall, this defense is not great. And because Washington will be playing from behind a lot this season, the defense may not get to show off its pass rushing ability. Having said that, the ability of the Washington defensive line is going to be a shock for opponents. There will be drive-stopping sacks in these games, and there will be game-changing turnovers because of the pressure this team can generate and create, especially early in games before opponents are able to build a lead. From Ryan Homler at NBC Sports Washington, the defensive line for the Washington football team ranks number 3 on PFF's NFL defensive line rankings for the 2020 season. One of the main reasons for the high ranking is, of course, Chase Young. The number 2 overall pick in the 2020 NFL draft is someone that PFF pegs as potentially the best pass rusher to come into the NFL in a decade. Young may be the biggest name of the group, but he's not solely responsible for the ranking. Washington has invested several first-round picks in the defensive line over the years, and there's now talent to show for it. When Chase Young is out, that disrupts the defensive line's ability to generate the type of pass rush needed to balance the holes everywhere else. Young is the straw that stirs the drink of this defensive line, and without him, the defense as a whole is in trouble. Now, a lot has been made about owner Dan Snyder, from the name change to the misconduct allegations, and I don't have any comment on that. But if Snyder deserves any credit for anything, it's that he acknowledged that there were negative forces on the coaching staff, cleaned house from top to bottom, and gave Ron Rivera the keys to the franchise. While Rivera may not have a forward-thinking approach in terms of the game of football at this point in his career, he sure as hell brings leadership to an organization that is in desperate need of it. Because of everything I've talked about, I'm bullish on this team, both short and long term, in spite of the fact that this team may not play plus EV football. Jeff Schwartz at SB Nation discusses what Rivera brings to Washington. Rivera is an excellent fit for any team, but particularly a team that doesn't have an identity, like this one. He's a former player who understands the relationship between a coach and a player. He's tough on his players, but respectful. They enjoy playing for him, and he's able to get the most from them. That ability to turn things around is needed in Washington, which hasn't made the postseason since 2015 and hasn't won a playoff game since the 2005 season. The worst-case scenario with Rivera is miles better than what Washington had with Gruden. If I'm a Washington fan, I'm pumped. It can only go up from here. The Washington coaching staff is more important than any other team as far as predicting future success. If we see Washington using pre-snap motion, plays out of unexpected formations, scheming the offense in such a way that minimizes the issues on the offensive line, and quick rhythm throws, that projects well moving forward. If, on the other hand, we see a vanilla offense with nothing out of the ordinary, it's not going to be good. Washington doesn't have enough pieces to succeed without a progressive offense using every trick in the book to scheme receivers open. From Bill in Bangkok at SB Nation, Washington. Every time I hear Scott Turner talk about the offensive plan, I am struck by his desire to run something that is not traditional. He seems to disdain the idea of throwing the ball to the receivers and handing the ball to the running backs. Instead, he seems focused on fielding a set of skill position offensive players with a combination of running and receiving skills that will allow him to use formations, motions, and movement to create mismatch opportunities on every play. His ability, or lack of ability, to do this effectively seems to me to be the key to whatever offensive success the Washington football team will enjoy this season. My final thoughts on the Washington football team relate to the schedule. Looking at the difficulty, this is not a tough schedule. It's right about average, with only 2 tough stretches with Arizona, Cleveland, Baltimore at the beginning of the year, all games Washington lost, and Pittsburgh, San Francisco, Seattle starting in Week 13. The NFC East is the worst division in football, so division games are winnable. Some betting notes. At this point in the year, there is a huge number for this team to win the division and make the playoffs. With the division the way it is, this isn't a minus EV play, meaning that there is value taking Washington to win the NFC East. Also, consider betting on Washington against all division foes, and if you can find a big number against any team with a bad offensive line like Cincinnati, Carolina, or Detroit. Let's move on to the New York Giants. The Giants are without a doubt the worst team in the NFC, and the second worst team in the NFL overall. General Manager David Gettleman is the laughingstock of the league, and the 2019 offseason was the cherry on top of this stupid sundae. Gettleman continued his trend of reaching in the draft, taking tackle Andrew Thomas out of Georgia 4th overall. The Giants took another tackle in the 3rd round, Matt Pert, who is currently warming the bench after failing to beat out veteran Cameron Fleming. That must mean Pert was really bad, because the Giants' starting O-line can't stop a nosebleed. From Eric Slater at gmenhq.com. Here we are, 3 years into Gettleman's tenure, and the Giants boast one of the worst offensive lines in the league. The Giants rank last in the league in rushing offense at 56.7 yards per game. To make matters worse, Daniel Jones accounts for more than half of that, rushing for 30.7 yards per game on scrambles or zone reads. Big Blue's running backs have combined for just 72 total yards on the season. Any thoughts of a productive 2020 season are already over, with the Giants showing no signs of improvement. At this point, the only goal for New York needs to be finding out whether or not Daniel Jones is the future at the quarterback position. To be fair to Jones, he has almost no talent around him, with a bunch of washed-up receivers, a second-string running back, a bad offensive line, and a fairly good tight end in Evan Ingram. The lack of offensive talent makes Jones difficult to evaluate, but I also feel like Jones should be showing more signs of progress, and if anything, he's regressing. According to Ryan Dunleavy at the New York Post, Jones has committed 7 turnovers during the Giants' 0-4 start, which includes back-to-back games without a touchdown for the first time since 1998. Only the Eagles' Carson Wentz has a lower quarterback rating than Jones, 68.3, among full-time starters. In the offseason, the Giants also hired Joe Judge to be the new head coach and Jason Garrett as offensive coordinator. I'm not hopeful for the Judge-Garrett connection, especially the Joe Judge part of it. For all of Garrett's faults as a coach, and for how much Michael Lombardi makes fun of him, Garrett can still do a pretty good impersonation of an offensive coordinator. And more importantly, Garrett has experience with developing young quarterbacks and might be able to lead Daniel Jones down the right path to success. The problems with Jason Garrett come when he starts making play-calling decisions. Whether it's when to run on early downs, deciding whether to go for it, kick a field goal, punt, things like that. Frankly, it looks to me as if Garrett is in charge of play calling, and if that's the case, this is not going to turn out well. And the same problems we all saw in Dallas will continue in New York. According to Jordan Raanan at ESPN, the New York Giants have scored 3 touchdowns in 16 quarters this season. Jason Garrett's offense isn't just struggling, it's bordering on incompetence. The problems are many. There are no big plays. They also remain a mess in the red zone, in part because of their league-worst running game. Garrett's play calling has been unimaginative. Quarterback Daniel Jones remains stuck on his first read, missing open receivers when there actually are open receivers. Right now, it doesn't seem that Garrett is doing anything right. But Garrett isn't even the biggest problem on the coaching staff. Why did the Giants hire Joe Judge? I mean, when you look at Judge's resume, it's hard to think of him as a serious candidate. He planned punt coverage for New England. Now, the Pats are known for their excellent special teams play, but so what? Judge also coached at Alabama, so he's tasted success in the pros and in college. But he's never been the guy who makes decisions. Even at Bama, he was a special teams assistant, never an offensive or defensive coordinator. Now, there is precedent for a special teams coach finding success. It worked out for Baltimore. John Harbaugh was a special teams coach, and he's a top 5 coach in the NFL now, no question. From Ralph Facciano at Sportsnet New York, Judge is no more of a ridiculous choice than when the Baltimore Ravens hired Eagles special teams coordinator John Harbaugh out of nowhere in 2008. And that certainly worked out okay. But here's the big difference. The Giants aren't exactly in a nothing-to-lose position. They have absolutely staked their reputation as a franchise on this hire. This is the Giants feeling like they discovered something that everyone else has been missing. And if they're wrong, if Judge turns out to be the next piece of rotten fruit off the Belichick coaching tree, he's going to take the whole organization down with him. Because the next step, the only step if this doesn't work out, will be for John Mara or Steve Tisch to completely clean house. When I heard that Joe Judge had been hired, I didn't think it was real. And I'm not going to pass judgment and bury him because he's an unknown quantity and he has no experience. I'm going to pass judgment and bury him because every decision and every quote and every piece of media he's done since becoming the coach has been a complete and total disaster. Now, what it all really speaks to is Dave Gettleman and his entirely broken concept of how to build a franchise. When you hear the sound bites of Joe Judge talking about how we're going to be a tough football team with a change in attitude, it makes me think that he's trying to do his best Bill Belichick impression. And we've all seen the other Belichick disciples take this kind of approach with a team, and we've all seen it fail miserably. At some point, all these owners are going to realize that there is only one Bill Belichick. And as much as they want to have their own version of him, it's just not going to happen. Roger Sherman at The Ringer discusses Judge's unique coaching methods. He's made headlines for a variety of kooky motivational tactics meant to instill discipline and a winning culture. Judge reminds me a lot of former Chicago Bulls coach Jim Boylan. Maybe Belichick's teams have been so successful because of the physical intensity of their practices. That's what his disciples seem to believe. My personal theory is that Belichick's teams have been so successful because he's the greatest head coach of all time. So when I see coaches like Judge make a big deal about the physicality part, it makes me think they're not fully equipped to follow through on the great coaching part. I absolutely still look at the decision in 2018 to take Saquon Barkley with the number 2 pick as the beginning of the end of Gettleman's tenure as general manager. And I think the hiring of Joe Judge is the end of the end. Gettleman might snake around for another year, and if Joe Judge doesn't turn out to be the Patrick Mahomes of coaching hires, then the Giants will be starting over again in 2 years. Look at it this way. The Giants roster is fundamentally flawed with holes everywhere. They're starting rookie offensive linemen with a quarterback that has a fumbling problem. I mean, talk about adding gasoline to the fire. Then Gettleman decides that the world revolves around Saquon Barkley in terms of his usage and his role on the offense. With Barkley now out for the year with a torn ACL, all this becomes even clearer. Barkley was the whole offense. Without him, the Giants have no idea how to be successful offensively. They have good but not great receiving weapons with no game breakers, just a bunch of possession guys. The receiving core is deep, so the team has been able to weather the injuries, but that doesn't matter when you don't have a quarterback that can get them the ball. On top of all of this, the defense is atrocious, and no amount of Joe Judge talking about toughness is going to turn these guys into more talented players. I mean, there is just absolutely no way that the talent level on this defense is not clearly bottom 5 in the NFL. It's really bad. From Anthony Rivardo at Empire Sports Media, every positional unit could use an injection of talent. Given the current state of the Giants roster, it is hard to see this team being competitive this season, despite the division being the worst in the NFL. Additionally, it is inexcusable on David Gettleman's part for the Giants roster to be as bad as it is. His seat is flaming hot, and it seems like the writing is on the wall for Dave Gettleman's impending doom. It's tough to find good things to say about this team. And I don't enjoy stomping on other people's hard work, even if it is Dave Gettleman. But it's obvious that Gettleman is not the right guy for this job in this era of football. He's never been skillful at roster construction. Any success Gettleman has had has been half luck, and the other half the work of other people. I just don't have any faith in Gettleman as an executive. The biggest way to derail a team long-term is failing in roster construction, and that's all Gettleman knows how to do. On top of the massive mistake drafting a running back second overall, Gettleman waited 2 years too long to replace Eli, and because of that, the team didn't get the benefit of having multiple shots to bring in a rookie quarterback and groom him for the role. Instead, you force in Daniel Jones while Eli is in his death throes. It's ridiculous. Gettleman brings in Ben McAdoo to coach the team, fires him, hires Pat Shurmur, but doesn't give him a chance because the roster is so poorly constructed. Shermer may be a better coordinator than a coach, but he wasn't given a fair shake in New York, and Gettleman continues to make questionable hires. At what point does the ownership group figure out that Gettleman is the problem? The absolute ceiling for this team is 3 wins. I mean, come on. According to Brian Giffra at The Big Lead, Dave Gettleman, like many people, thought he would be fired after last season. The Giants decided to keep him, despite Gettleman amassing a 9-23 record in 2 years as the team's general manager coming into this season, and reportedly gave him 1 more year to turn things around. But after an 0-4 start, it's now obvious things won't get turned in 2020, and the Giants must cut their losses and hand Gettleman a pink slip immediately before he screws this up even worse. Some final thoughts on the New York Giants. This is another team that is going to be the get-right spot for every offense in the league over the course of the season. Daniel Jones has shown no signs of taking steps forward, and in my opinion, the Giants need to dump him and use their 2021 draft to take one of the big 3 quarterbacks. Whether it's Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, or Trey Lance, the Giants need a new quarterback. I would hate to see the Giants waste Trevor Lawrence, but it's what it is. Looking at the schedule, the Giants have no easy games. But with all the injuries popping up across the league, the Giants might be able to take advantage of a team starting second stringers at key positions. Some betting notes. Bet the team sack total over for every opponent with even a decent pass rush. DFS players, consider taking every defense playing the Giants, especially cheap defenses like Dallas, Cincinnati, and Seattle. Moving on to the Philadelphia Eagles, this has to be the weirdest team in 2020. Last season, Philadelphia was the NFC East champion with a 9-7 record and was a popular pick to go to the championship. Then Jadeveon Clowney took Wentz out of the game with a vicious hit. Josh McCown came in with a torn hamstring and tried, but it just wasn't enough, and that's all she wrote. The expectation heading into 2020 was that Carson Wentz would come back healthy and take a big leap forward and realize all of the potential we've seen from him through the years. But it just doesn't seem like he has that much left in the tank. I know that sounds crazy because he's only 27, but just watch the guy play. It's true. From Brandon Lee Gouton at SB Nation. It's officially time to be concerned about the Philadelphia Eagles and their leader, quarterback Carson Wentz. Wentz now has 6 picks on the year, 1 less than he had all of last season. Wentz became the first Eagles QB with multiple interceptions in 3 straight games since Ron Jaworski in 1985. That was the season the Eagles drafted Randall Cunningham in the 2nd round, signaling the beginning of the end of Jaworski's time in Philadelphia. I'll come back to Wentz in a minute. I still like Doug Pederson as a head coach, but I feel like he's regressed in terms of his decision-making. I don't like the change to his less aggressive, let's not go for it on 4th down mentality. But I think at least part of the change comes from a lack of faith in Carson Wentz's ability to get it done. It also doesn't help when the entire starting receiving corps, except for Greg Ward, is injured again. Anyone with a brain could see that having Deshaun Jackson as your number 1 receiver was going to turn out bad. And I'm not shocked at all that he's hurt again. This time it's a hamstring, but Jackson's body is failing him. The guy's washed. Greg Ward is a bright spot, but literally every other starting receiver is hurt. The Eagles have some young players in Jalen Reagor and J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, but again, both are injured. Jalen Reagor in particular has shown promise, but he's out until probably after the Eagles bye, so at this point it doesn't matter. GM Howie Roseman also has to take some of the blame for the situation the Eagles are currently in. Dave Murphy at the Philadelphia Inquirer discusses the receiving corps. The Philadelphia Eagles showed up for a professional football game with a wide receiving corps that consisted of a rookie 5th-round draft pick, 2 recent signings off the practice squad, and a 25-year-old who entered the season having played more games in the Alliance of American Football than in the National Football League. At a position that requires as much raw physical ability as any on the field, This is the best that the Eagles can do. Maybe it didn't kill them on Sunday night, but it has threatened to do so in almost every game that they have played over the last year, and it will remain an existential crisis for as long as Howie Roseman continues to fail to stock Doug Pederson's offense with the talent it needs to function. The only other team that can compete with the number of injuries suffered by the Eagles is the 49ers. However, unlike the 49ers, the Eagles are playing with an almost entirely new offensive line than the one projected before the season began. The only starter still playing is center Jason Kelce. The loss of almost the entire O-line has made Wentz's job even more difficult. Not only does he have no receivers to throw to, but an often injured quarterback is being pressured on almost every play and taking a lot of punishment as a result. The Eagles' cluster injuries are insane. According to Dave Spadaro at PhiladelphiaEagles.com, injuries have decimated the plans the team put in place for 2020, and they haven't been of the day-to-day or week-to-week variety of injuries. They've been devastating. A torn Achilles tendon suffered by Pro Bowl right guard Brandon Brooks in the spring, a torn biceps that sidelined second-year left tackle Andre Dillard in training camp, a knee injury felled solid and sturdy left guard Isaac Seumalo, a foot injury that forced Jason Peters re-signed to replace Brooks and then moved to the left side to take Dillard's starting spot to injured reserve for at least the next 2 games. And most recently, standout right tackle Lane Johnson is dealing with still recovering from offseason ankle surgery, an injury he will be dealing with all season. Having brought up the struggles, the 2020 season begins and ends with Carson Wentz. Although Wentz hasn't played well thus far in 2020, it's not his play that has changed my mind on Wentz being a viable NFL quarterback. It was the drafting of Jalen Hurts in the second round. More to the point, my perspective of how the Eagles view Wentz's future with the franchise changed with the drafting of Hurts. The signal that drafting Hurts so high in the draft sends is that the Eagles have serious concerns with Wentz's long-term health and his sustainability. Wentz has been injured a lot in his career, but the specific injury he suffered in that playoff game last year was one that I kind of brushed off at the time, but after seeing them draft Hurts with their second-round pick, and after watching that hit more carefully, he really got smashed by Clowney, and it was bad. Now, I don't think it was dirty as much as it was just a top-tier physical freak playing at 100 miles an hour. I mean, he crushed him, and I don't think Wentz has recovered from that one. One of the exciting things about Wentz was that prior to his ACL tear, he had this ability to gain first downs in short yardage situations. Wentz had this weird next-level athleticism and escapability that opponents didn't see coming, especially since Doug Pederson had faith in his quarterback and was going for it so much on fourth down. At that time, it seemed like Wentz and the Eagles had a bright future with a really high ceiling of what the team was capable of. And it's all kind of been shattered by Wentz's injuries, the roster construction, and now by taking Hurts. Admittedly, I could be overreacting about all of this, but I do think the drafting of Hurts sends a message that there is a long-term concern about Wentz as the starter, especially this year with all the injuries to the offensive line. James Simpson at Sky Sports relives Wentz's struggles. Once considered a future league MVP, Carson Wentz has regressed to one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the NFL. Put quite simply, he is not completing passes, not getting the ball downfield, not scoring, and is turning the ball over constantly. In 2017, Wentz was in the MVP conversation before tearing his ACL, and Nick Foles famously leading the franchise to a championship. Since then, 2018 was again ended by injury, this time a fracture in his back. 2019 was due to be the year we finally saw playoff Wentz, but a hit to his head by Jadeveon Clowney sent him to the sidelines with a concussion. The good news is that my expectations for this team are not that different if Wentz starts all 16 games versus some combination of Wentz and Hurts. just because overall the talent is strong in important places. And as players return from injury and the O-line gets more continuity playing together, the team will improve. The Eagles as a franchise are still pretty smart, pretty forward-thinking, analytically heavy, and committed to plus EV decision-making. Defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz is still top 10 in the league, with a great overall scheme highlighted by a defensive line full of studs. The D-line is also deep enough that the Eagles can use a variety of defensive rotations and just keep throwing different sets of players at you. The linebacking core needs help and is definitely the weakest link on the defense. However, even with lackluster linebacker play, if the secondary can come together and improve as a unit, the Philadelphia defense will be tough late in the year. According to Jared Dubin at CBS Sports, Jim Schwartz's defense deserves credit for the win. The linebackers were largely atrocious in their defense of George Kittle and the Niners' motion running game, but the front four dominated much of the night, putting Nick Mullins under duress and eventually on the bench, and setting up 3 key takeaways that injected tons of life into Philly. My final thoughts on the Eagles. Philadelphia is currently competitive in the NFC East. Surprising considering the Eagles' record, but the division is just that bad. The Eagles and the Cowboys are obvious favorites to win the division, and are weirdly comparable teams. The Eagles have better personnel defensively by far, and the Cowboys have better personnel offensively by far. This is going to be a great division showdown and should be fun to watch. Even if the Eagles win the division, their ceiling is still relatively low, and I've soured a bit on Wentz's overall potential. Even if Philadelphia gets 16 games out of him, does he still have enough tools and overall talent at this point to be effective? He doesn't seem to care to protect himself when he runs or takes hits in the pocket, but if he goes too far the other way and decides that he's not taking as many hits this year, does that change him and drop him down the rabbit hole? Is the reason why he's not dynamic anymore because he's trying to protect himself? That's a big concern for me as far as the injuries he's already sustained. I wouldn't blame him if he didn't run the ball as much or take as many hits. I mean, maybe he sees that first down marker and sees a safety running at him at 25 miles an hour and makes the decision to hit the sideline short rather than taking that hit. You add up a few plays like that, and suddenly he's not that dynamic playmaker. He's just a run-of-the-mill quarterback, and the long-term success of this team falls off a cliff because of it. Finally, looking at the schedule, this isn't an easy go of it. One of the toughest schedules in the league with no easy wins. The Eagles should win both games with the Giants, but other than that, it's a rough road. Some betting notes: wait until late in the season to bet on this team. Barring further injury, if the skill positions can get healthy and the secondary plays above expectation, this will be a tough defense and a cagey team down the stretch. Look to play on the Eagles against Seattle, the Packers, and New Orleans. Finally, we come to America's team, the Dallas Cowboys. I'll be discussing the season-ending ankle injury to Dak Prescott in detail in a moment. But overall, the injury to Dak spells another lost season for the Cowboys and another season-ending injury to a key player, something that is almost becoming normal in 2020. Even before the Dak injury happened, the Cowboys weren't going to go far because of this defense. I mean, it's shockingly bad. It's awful. This almost feels like a repeat from 2019. Last season, the Cowboys were the biggest underachievers in the league, with a projected win total of 11 and finishing 8-8. I've been high on this team for years, and looking at their roster, it doesn't make sense why this team has so much difficulty winning games. The prevailing thought was that the issues were related to Jason Garrett, and there's no doubt that Garrett had to go. But the team has continued the same narrative of underachieving, just in different ways. I didn't like the hire of Mike McCarthy as head coach either. Yeah, the guy's won a championship, but his act had worn so thin in Green Bay that Rodgers was pretending his helmet mic wasn't working so he could call his own plays. What does that tell you? He did keep Kellen Moore as offensive coordinator, and he's not Jason Garrett, so he's technically an upgrade, but overall it was a bad hire. From Andrew Holleran at The Spun, the Dallas Cowboys fired Jason Garrett following the 2019 regular season because of the head coach's inability to take the team to a new level. Jerry Jones hired from former Packers coach Mike McCarthy to take the Cowboys where Garrett did not. Well, McCarthy is doing that, but not in the way Jones imagined. The Cowboys have gone to a different level in 2020, from average to really bad. The Cowboys are just a shaky, mistake-prone team so far this season, and most of that blame rests on McCarthy's shoulders. Some of the blame also rests on owner and general manager Jerry Jones's decision-making. In 2019, Jerry was putting pressure on Garrett to give the ball to Zeke more often. It was obvious. They gave Zeke the big contract and wanted to get him the touches. The same problem has bled into 2020. There are too many cooks in the kitchen. And even though McCarthy has championship bona fides, the pressure to do what Jerry wants is still there. I really think that Jerry is upset that he didn't get more credit for that early 90s Cowboys dynasty with Aikman, Irvin, and Emmitt Smith. And if Jerry doesn't leave the coaching to the coaches, this team is toast. Dallas has all these offensive weapons, and they also gave Amari Cooper a big contract on top of Zeke, and in the process screwed up the contract negotiation by not getting Dak signed. Even with Dak out and with Prescott playing on the franchise tag, the Cowboys deciding not to get Dak locked down long-term is going to prove to be a mistake when all is said and done. Not getting him on a team-friendly deal before the Mahomes mega deal was a misfire. And because the team has so much money tied up in Zeke, they lost other important players, which goes back to a theme throughout these season update videos where franchises make mistakes in roster construction, and because of that, the team's talent is wasted. Let's make it clear, the Zeke deal was a ludicrous, ridiculous deal from the start, especially when Dallas has a more than capable backup in Tony Pollard, who should probably be getting more touches. According to Jason La Canfora from CBS Sports, Ezekiel Elliott has recorded fewer than 100 rush yards in each of the first 4 games of a season for the first time in his career. He's also received fewer than 15 carries in consecutive games for the first time since he entered the league in 2016. Remember, Zeke has ranked among the top 2 in carries and top 5 in rush yards in all but one of his previous 4 NFL seasons. The offensive talent on this team is undeniable, but having that much talent means there are lots of mouths to feed. Drafting CeeDee Lamb with a first-round pick was weird considering all the holes on defense. It seemed like the Cowboys went with the best player available approach rather than addressing their needs. And this is a team with so many needs on the defensive side of the ball. By giving all these offensive players fat contracts, Dallas lost a player like Byron Jones, who was by far the best defensive player on the roster. DeMarcus Lawrence is a great pass rusher, but doesn't have the same level of impact on a game-by-game basis. The linebacking duo of Leighton Vander Esch and Jalen Smith is underwhelming even when healthy. And Vander Esch is out until November with a broken collarbone, so the linebacker core is even further depleted. I guess I'll also mention that linebacker Sean Lee is out again with a groin injury and should be back by the end of October. But let's be real, Sean Lee's just going to get hurt again, and at 34 years old, I hope he just retires. At this point, I blame the Cowboys for continuing to pay this guy. The Cowboys also signed Gerald McCoy, but were then forced to drop him prior to the season when he tore his quad. Putting all the injuries aside, this defense was never going to be good, but no one expected it to be this bad. According to David Howman at SB Nation, when the 2020 campaign began, this unit was going to be whatever the mismatch of parts and plan dictated. Thus far, the result has been nothing short of terrible, to a historical degree. How bad? 4 games into the season, Dallas has given up an atrocious 146 points. That's an average of 36.5 points per game, which currently projects as the single worst scoring defense in team history. Okay, let's discuss the Dak Prescott injury. The injury occurred in the third quarter on a scramble in which Prescott was tackled awkwardly by Giants free safety Logan Ryan. With the game tied at 23, the Cowboys dialed up a designed quarterback draw. Prescott broke through one tackle and then tried to stiff-arm Giants defensive back Logan Ryan. As Ryan dragged Prescott down, the quarterback's ankle got caught underneath Ryan. Now, we often see players suffer high ankle sprains when their ankles get caught at that sort of angle, but when Prescott came out of the tackle, his ankle was facing the wrong direction. If you were watching that play, you're not going to forget what you saw for a long time. I'm not going to. And if you didn't see the play, consider yourself lucky. Officially, the Cowboys announced that Prescott suffered a compound fracture and dislocation of his right ankle, which means the bone penetrated his skin as part of the injury. That play was the end of Prescott's season. I've seen some speculation that this could be career-ending, which thankfully is not true. According to Dr. David Chow at ProFootballDoc and Outkick.com, the only good news is that this isn't the end of his career. This 2020 season is done. End of story. But he can still come back. Career-wise, this is not the end. You can return from this. Other players have done so. Darren Sproles in his second year had a similar injury and went on to an amazing career at a skill position as well. I do not think this is an Alex Smith situation, but it will be Andy Dalton the rest of the way. The implications of this injury are far-reaching. Now, if you're a Dak Prescott fan, you might not like what I'm about to say, but we can all profit from this. Before you shake your head and judge me, remember that my business is money, and this isn't personal. When Dak starts sending me his game checks, then I'll start worrying about the morality of profiting from his injury. But until that happens, let me explain how we use this situation to our advantage. The public sports betting market sees that Dak Prescott is out for the season, and immediately the narratives begin. Oh, the season is over. Without Dak, there's no hope for the Cowboys. Wrong. Because of how important Prescott is to the Cowboys offense, because of that shocking visual image of Dak's ankle and how awful it looked on video, and because of the fact that former Pro Bowl quarterback Andy Dalton is now starting in place of Prescott, we're about to make money. From David Moore at the Dallas Morning News, Ezekiel Elliott should once again become the focal point of this offense. The power no longer tilts in Prescott's direction the way it has since the start of last season. Elliott can take some pressure off Dalton and keep a defense that has been under siege off the field. And don't forget the receivers. Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, and CeeDee Lamb give Dalton a wealth of options he never enjoyed in Cincinnati. But it will be up to Dalton to get them the ball at the right time. He must be more careful with the ball than Prescott, who presided over an offense that lost the ball 10 times in 13 quarters before his season-ending injury. You can point to Dalton looking terrible in his final seasons with Cincinnati, but at the end there with the Bengals, he had no one to throw to. He had a horrible offensive line, and the only bright spot was running back Joe Mixon on a putrid offense. Now Dalton, a Texas native, has come home, and I expect some big things from him, especially as he gets reps with the first-teamers. It ain't over for the Cowboys, ladies and gentlemen, not by a long shot. Some final thoughts on Dallas. I have no idea why Jerry hasn't gone out and signed Earl Thomas. Yes, Earl Thomas is insane, but the Cowboys are known for signing troubled players and getting production out of them. Just look at Aldon Smith. If the defense can find a way to stop the run, Dallas can win the division. Philly just doesn't have enough receivers to compete. Looking at the schedule, it's tough overall, but this is a team that can still reach 9 wins if everything falls right for them. Even if Dallas wins the division, it's tough to win in the playoffs when their defense can't stop anyone. A few betting notes. With Dak hurt and Andy Dalton starting in place of him, we have about a 3 to 6 week window where the sports betting marketplace is going to be drastically undervaluing the Cowboys. I recommend looking for the best number each week and then putting some good-sized bets down on Dallas, both on the spread, and if you find a juicy number, you need to sprinkle some on the money line as well. Also, if the Cowboys get a big lead on someone, live bet the total over every time, because there aren't many offenses that I wouldn't take to score some garbage time points or even come back on the Cowboys, especially when opposing defenses stop past his prime Zeke and get the ball back quick. These live totals will be bread and butter all year. No lead is safe with this defense. Also, take Dalton's player props over, particularly after the first week. The Cowboys defense will give up so many points so quickly that Dalton will have plenty of opportunities to go over his totals. If you've listened to the information I've given you throughout the video, you now know how to bet on the NFC East from week 1 through the playoffs. You also know how to attack the NFL betting market in 2020, and you know how to pick the right spots to make money on each team. I definitely want to know what you think about my projections for these teams. It's important to me to know if my content is helping you, so let me know in the comments. I'll make sure and respond. Also, consider heading over to my website, aosportspicks.com, and sign up for a sports betting package where you can get my picks each week. Finally, make sure and subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and click the notification bell so you get notified whenever I release a new video. Doing that really helps the channel grow and get placed higher in the YouTube search results. Once again, I'm Alpha Omega. See you next time.